I hope you're going to enjoy this video. This video is going to be mostly audio. It's going to start out where you're going to see Kirk and I, but it will be just mainly an audio video. Vic Cundiff stopped by and visited with us, and we spoke about everything from cryptids to feral people. Really enjoyed talking to him. He's a very nice guy, very pleasant man to talk with, very knowledgeable, and just all in all, really enjoyed having him on the show. We hope to have him back sometime. He, like I said, he just had a lot of knowledge. I enjoyed talking to him, and we want to thank him for coming to our show. Support him. He works hard at what he does, and at the end, he will give you all the other shows that he does and how to find him and check him out. I'm not going to take up any more of your time. Let's go ahead and get to the interview. Thank you for watching.
Okay, guys, here we are. We have Vic Cundiff on. He is a special guest, and I'll let Vic take it from here.
Well, thanks for saying that. I'm not sure how much of a special guest I am, but thanks for having me nonetheless.
We think you're a special guest, Vic.
Yeah, we're glad to have you.
Well, thanks for saying that. I appreciate it. No, I just feel lucky to be in a position to be able to do what I do. I don't think there's anything special about me other than being lucky to be in this position to have access to so many doggone eyewitnesses. And I just want to pinch myself. Some of them are really not in need of help, but the ones that really are in need of help, when you actually can help them and they can start functioning again. I mean, that's what makes all the work that I put into it so worth it. It really does.
Oh, I can totally agree with you on that. And the worst part is your mainstream people literally will not believe when somebody talks about a dogman, about a Sasquatch, or any other cryptid beast. You know, they get looked at like they're crazy, like they've got two heads.
Oh,
anybody that helps these people are great.
I had times when I was smaller that I wanted to cry. I mean, been at grannies and stuff and everything that happened, and it was like little kids hear scary stories, and I had to live a scary story.
Well, yeah, that's never good. These guys don't pull punches. They'll mortify a little kid every bit as quickly as they will an adult. It's always bad when they do that to anyone, but especially when you're talking about little kids, when you have dogmen that visit every night or almost every night and they're tapping on the windows. And of course, you know how it is, little kids, they're just curious by nature. So of course they're going to go and part the drapes. And when they do, they see this monster standing there. And when you're that small, you have a really hard time processing things. And when you have an experience like that at that age, I mean, that just really knocks you right off the rails and all. So yeah, it's just horrible what these guys do. Now, obviously not all of them do this sort of thing, but for the ones that do, it's just horrible. It really is.
I've been close to him, several times, and every time it seemed like really I was the closest to him was either whenever I was young or whenever I had my young son and nephew with me. So I've always thought that there was a connection to the proximity according, to the age group.
Yeah, there might be something to that. Maybe if small kids are around, they know that if they target them, it's more of a sure bet that they're going to get a very strong reaction out of them than an adult. But as frightening as these things are to look at and be around, it's pretty much a sure bet that they're going to mortify anyone that they come around. So it's hard to understand why they do what they do. It really is.
We always wondered what, brought them to my granny's house when we was down there. There was, it happened back whenever my mom and them were kids, and then of course me growing up, and I don't know, it just seemed like it it didn't really hurt nobody. It didn't really, take nothing that it shouldn't have took, but it was always around, always there, always scratching on the house, wiggling the doorknob. And it came in a few times. It did come into the house, and it stood over the bed while they slept one night, and which scared my aunt. But whenever it walked off, it ran its hand across her feet, and it wasn't afraid to come in either.
Oh wow! Didn't they lock their doors?
Yeah, they had a room that my uncle stayed in, and he smoked, and he would sneak cigarettes. And the back of the house where they built this room on, it was actually pretty short. It was a little short room, and he would smoke using that window. Well, they finally realized that he was leaving the window unlocked sometimes, so whatever it was coming through the window and then into the house at night.
Wow! If you have a dog man coming into the house, it's it's going to behoove you to find out how that sucker's getting in, door, window, under the crawl space, you name it. But I can only imagine what they must have gone through, especially with it running its hand over her foot like that when it was leaving. Wow.
Yeah, my mom was the I think probably the one that got probably the best view of it. She was left outside in the car. I guess they'd been carrying groceries, and she had woke up as a little girl and started up the sidewalk, I guess, to go in the house or something. And whenever she looked, it had its like its upper jaw was looking up over the steps at her. And I asked her, probably 5 million times, what it looked like, and she says, the best way she could describe it, not exactly, but it looked a lot like the movie Silver Bullet, the werewolf on that movie. And she was just a little girl, and it would sit there and would look up over the steps at her. And the steps were really tall because they had a pretty tall porch, and she was really close to it. And after that had happened, they always felt like it probably either wanted her more than everybody else, it was more interested in her more than everybody else, but it would definitely, when she was there, it would ramp up a lot more than whenever any of the other girls was staying there.
Poor thing. That's horrible. Yeah, sometimes they'll kind of target someone and follow them around and do things to that person and around that person that they don't do with everyone else. It's hard to understand why they pick this person over the next, but sure seems like they do sometimes.
Yeah, it could get pretty
I
bad.
actually, I actually have a good friend that, in the course of 3 years, has had 7 dogman encounters at his house. Now, I will say at no point in time have they been threatening toward him, but still, it's got to give you an eerie feeling. And the one time in particular, he had it sitting in a tree looking in his back room at him. Just sat there watching him.
Wow, that's awfully creepy. When you
Yep.
go in your house, you expect a certain level of sanctuary. You don't expect to have to deal with things like that. And not to even mention when you told us about the dog man that was coming into your aunt and uncle's house. I can't even imagine what they must have gone through. Like I said, especially when it ran its hand over her foot when it was leaving that night.
Yeah, they well, it was every night it would show up, and this is whenever my mom and them were children, and then as they grew up, us kids, would go down with our mom and them to see my granny, and we always knew the rules. Nighttime, you came inside, you locked the doors, you pulled the curtains, you didn't go outside. And there was times we would go outside, and when we did go outside, we had some really bad encounters. We was playing outside one time, and they had a long like a long fence in the front yard. It had honeysuckle all the way down it that separated the front yard from a small driveway that went off down into the hog pasture where Grandpa had raised hogs. And something that night started shaking the fence, and of course it scared me. And I have my little cousin with me; he's a little younger than me. And I was like, "Did you hear that?" And he's like, "Yeah." And it really started shaking the fence. Well, we took off running, And whenever we ran into the house, you could actually hear it outside. It actually laughed.
Wow, that's eerie. Sounds like you were captives in that home almost. Did you go into the woods, or when you would go outside, would you pretty much hang close around the house?
We was always made to stay in the yard. They had the yard fenced, and we weren't allowed to leave the yard. There was times that we would go down and to the hog pasture, but it was just a little ways outside of the fence. Nighttime was terrible. Sometimes it would push on the doors, turn the doorknobs. We learned at night whenever you went to the bathroom that you would try to walk without creaking the floors, because if you creak the floors, it would follow you. And one night I was on my way back to the bathroom, which was in the back of the house, and this is an old country house, and it was really dark in the back, where the bathroom was. They only had one yard light way out front, and I accidentally stepped and made the creak sound. And whenever I did, it hit the back door and started rattling the doorknob, and it was terrifying. You just knew that door was going to open.
Yeah, they do that a lot, that doorknob rattling thing. I tell eyewitnesses all the time that if they wanted to snatch the door out of the hole, they can, but they're just doing that as a way to terrify you. So, yeah, I've got
Hmm.
no doubts that was what was going on back then when it was rattling that doorknob or the other doorknobs in the house. But they do know how to push our buttons. They're awfully good at what they do, unfortunately.
Yes,
There was
they are.
there was a particular night I told Kirk about. I was probably 16, and my cousin he'd been 15, and my granny had a stroke, and she was bedridden, and it had been done. It was pretty bad because the girls were taking turns staying nights with her to take care of her, the six girls, and they would rotate. And on the nights that my mom would stay, it would always be worse. So we decided one night we were going to sneak down and try to catch whatever this was while my mom was already there in the dark. So dark time came around, and I had a 410 single shot, and my cousin had a 22, and we took off through the woods and through the fields and everything. And there were some old oil tanks that set up just on top of the hill to where you could get a good view of my granny's house. So we were sitting up there watching, trying to see if we could see it messing around the house with her yard light. Her yard light, there was a lot of shade trees, so it would kind of filter down through the trees, but it was enough that you could still see shadows pretty good out there. And we were watching, and there it is at the back of the house. So we move up closer to the house, and as we got closer to the house, it had went back off and down into the hog pasture. Well, in the hog pasture, the pond had kind of dried up, and it had a whole bunch of cattails that had grew up in it. So we walked down into the cattails. We was figuring that's where it was at. And when we got down in there was a small piece of tin that Grandpa had laid across where the pond would drain off when it would get too full. And we was just coming up on that, and whatever this thing was, it raised up, and it was really wide. It wasn't real tall, but it was wide. It was thick. You could tell it was thick. And we both shot it at point blank range, and it fell. And when it fell on that piece of tin. Well, of course, our parents heard the gunshot inside the house, so they all come running outside, started the cars, and were shining their headlights down there. And it gets up after we'd shot it because we thought we killed it. We were like, oh, wow, we finally got it. And it stands up and it runs up behind the chicken house. Well, we wanted to run up and, finish off what we had shot. And there was a real thick blood trail, like that real thick blood, where we knew that we had hit it really good. We'd both hunted, so we knew that it was a vital shot. So we were reloading and we're heading up. And of course, our parents wouldn't let us go out there. They yelled at us and they called my aunt. And she'd sent my uncle down, and my dad ended up showing up. And when they showed up, whatever it was behind the chicken house. It was growling and like scratching the tin on the chicken house. It got up and it took off running across the pasture, and it had something over its back. They thought that it either had some feed with it, or it had grabbed something. And then later on, after they got to thinking, they said that was probably the mom that had grabbed the juvenile and had ran off with it, and that juvenile was trying to get us to go over behind the chicken house where it was laying, and then no telling what would have happened.
Ooh, that's awfully eerie to think about if that's what was going on. Yeah, thank goodness he didn't head up there.
Yeah, it makes you really
What?
it makes you think.
It really
Yeah, it
does.
is a pretty good assumption.
I always tell eyewitnesses, never fire on these guys unless you're convinced that you're going to die already. So it's not a situation where a dogman was bluffing you, like in a bluff charge, while you fire on it. It didn't intend to attack you, but you just shot it. So now
Right.
there's every possibility it's going to ramp up the game and follow through. So, yeah,
Right?
when you shoot these guys, it's really hard to say what they're going to do.
It came back the next night, and it was it was worse. It took the head off of a pig and stuck it on the fence post.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got a real keen sense of vengeance. So I'm surprised that something worse than that didn't happen.
We was I think the only thing that really saved us is Granny was so strict and our moms were so strict that we were always made, to come in right before dark, and it was just like a lockdown. I mean, we went inside and everything was locked, and we just stayed in until the next day.
Well, after having something like that happen, that's enough to make you not want to leave the house forever.
It was, we used to cry when we were little. We would always, I'd tell our mom and dad, can we please leave before dark? Because we didn't want to be there after dark and, have to leave. And they have I tell people their IQ is really high because when Granny was sick, she had a bell. And she would ring this little bell whenever she would need help. And we would go to her bedroom to see what she needed. And one night, the bell was ringing. And whenever you would go check, she was still asleep. And we couldn't figure out why she would ring the bell and then go to sleep. And then we stood there, and the bell rings, but Granny's asleep. Whatever it was had crawled up into the tree, was watching from the tree through her window, and it was making the bell ringing noise so it could watch us walk past that window to her bedroom.
Yeah, they do
They
things
are
like that.
extremely smart.
That they are. Yeah, they do things like that. It really does make you wonder what the extent of their abilities are. I mean, I tell people I wouldn't be surprised if they have human level intelligence, or maybe their intelligence is even higher than ours. You never really know.
Very true.
It makes you wonder, you know, what is their lifespan? Because even to this day, my mom can go fishing with us at nighttime, and it's like it just knows that she's there. It's worse. It throws sticks at us. It throws rocks at us. It does its its hoops and its whistles, and we've seen it walk up and down the lake where we fish, and where I live is in the middle of nowhere. I mean, we don't even have a 911 address. When you're in the woods, you're in the woods, and it's just it's an eerie feeling. Kurt's heard I had one make a baby crying noise on me one night, and I actually recorded it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it sounds just like a baby.
Except when I sent it to my friend that does forensic audio examination, he said it wasn't human.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it wasn't.
Sounded exactly like a baby crying. But yet, when Ralph examined it, he said the voice print is definitely not human.
Wow, man, that's awfully creepy. There have been several eyewitnesses who've reported hearing them make baby crying sounds, though. So it's not like that's unprecedented.
Oh, it was. I mean, I recorded it. I mean, it sounds just like a newborn baby. It is. It was enough that it actually caused me to go up closer to to examine, and then I got to thinking that there's no way there's a baby out here because I mean we're in the middle of nowhere, and it probably wasn't 10 minutes. I think Kirk in the video after I had backed off of it, it started doing the whooping and the whistling.
Yeah, maybe not even that long, Mike.
Yeah, it's like it knew I figured out that it wasn't a baby, and then it went to its other calls, and it got
Yep.
pretty hairy down there at that time.
Literally.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say. Like I said, they know how to press our buttons. They know what to do to get a desired response out of us. Whether it's doing certain things to terrify us or making that baby cry sound to just drive you crazy sitting there, making you just have to go out there and investigate. So they know what they're doing. They, like I said, they know how to press our buttons.
Right. You know, I don't know, Vic, if you've heard them or not. Have you ever heard them or heard of them speaking?
Oh, yeah.
I witnessed that. I just witnessed it like one time for sure that I knew of my whole life. But I was laying in a bed that my mom normally slept in when she would take care of my granny, and there was an old water cooler that was in the window. They didn't have an air conditioner; they had the old water cooler, and you could kind of see out around it the light from the yard light. And I was laying there, and all of a sudden, the shadow comes over the light, so you know there's something at the window, and it starts saying my mom's name through the water cooler, thinking that she was laying where I was actually laying. And that was probably one of the most frightening nights because to hear it speak, it was kind of a humanish, but more of a animalistic voice, like it was trying to. You could understand it, but it was trying to talk, but it wasn't as clear. It was more of a deeper in the throat kind of a talk.
I've heard them talking to
Now,
eyewitnesses, but only via mind speak, I guess you could call it. Never just vocally putting it out there.
Right. It stood on the front sidewalk one time. My granny would sit in her chair, and she would look from her chair, and then she could look through her front door, and then through the front door was an add-on porch that was covered in plexiglass, and they had a door on it also that they would leave open for the wind to blow through. And it walked up on the sidewalk one night, and stretched its arm out, and started doing with its fingers, the come here motion, and it kept saying my granny's name over and over at her.
Wow, that's pretty
now, see, the
eerie.
time that I've actually experienced it, it called the lady's name perfectly, and it did it in her brother's voice. I mean, it absolutely mimicked the lady's brother's voice, except we know the brother was half a mile away in the opposite direction. It could not have been him, but she swore it was, and thank God before she actually got to the wood line, she realized, no, that's not him. He's not over here. And that got to be a very tense situation there at that point in time because it's like, okay, what exactly is this doing it? And probably, I'm going to say an hour and 45 minutes later, lo and behold, we had just a very quick sighting of a dog.
Well, both of you know that Sasquatch do that too. It makes you wonder how
Yes,
they do that because with neither one of them with neither one of them having mouths that are adapted to, if you look at them at face value, their mouths are not adapted for speech. So
right?
it makes you wonder what's behind that. If that is some kind of a broadcasted mind speak, maybe, so you can actually hear it and
Maybe,
understand it, or what? But I just can't figure that one out.
maybe.
There's a
Now, I will say that a Sasquatch's mouth configuration is, say, closer configured to be apt to be able to speak than what a dog man is, but yet we know that both of them actually speak.
As far as the speaking, there was a time. This is back whenever my mom was younger. There was a guy that used to that went to school with him. There's always the bigger, the tougher, the rougher kid in school that he always fought. Wasn't scared of nobody, and he always thought that what was going on at my granny's. He said he thought was a pervert or a window peeker. And he told my granny one time, he said, "I'll come down and take care of it for you. Don't you worry. I'll take care of it." She said, "No, that's not a good idea." And he came down one night, and he was sitting in the house like normal. And Granny said the normal thing started happening. It started scratching on the house, and she would always say that it sounded like a coffee pot perking, is how she described its breathing. And it started scratching on the house and everything. And she said he jumps up, runs outside, runs around the corner of the house. Just a little bit later, he comes right back in the house and he falls down. And she said he's as white as his t-shirt. Well, he never would talk about what had happened. And I remember asking my mom and everybody, my uncles for years, I was like, what did he see? What did he see? And all my uncles ever say is, you don't want to know what's out there, but he never would tell what he's seen. So just about 2 years ago, I contacted his daughter, and maybe a little longer. It was 2019 when COVID hit, and I asked her, if he would tell what he had seen that night because it was, almost 50 years, and he still wouldn't tell me. And then I learned about 6 months after I contacted her, she contacted me back and said, "I have a letter for you from my dad. He had passed away from COVID, and he left me a letter. And in the letter, he said, Mike, it's time for somebody to know what I seen that night." And he said it changed his life. I read the letter on a video, but he said when he ran outside that night, he ran down the side of the house and went around to the back to where it was dark. Now, Granny had been at home by herself because my grandpa was a logger. He was always gone. She would dump the scraps out the back door into a hog trough for the dogs, the chickens, and everything else. Well, when he went around the corner, he said it was standing there. And he said it was grabbing food and it was shoving it in the side of its mouth instead of eating from the front of the mouth. He said it was shoving the food in the side of its mouth, but it was eating real gross, like just slopping it in there, all over itself. And he said, if I ever seen a werewolf, he said, I seen one that night. And he said it was sideways toward him. And he said it bent its head, and he called it a smile. He said it smiled at me, and it said, hello. And he said, I ran. And he said, I ran into your granny's house. And after that, he said, I didn't hunt no more. I didn't fish no more. Everybody thought I was crazy. He said, but I gave up everything that I used to enjoy. And they actually moved away over that. They ended up moving to the city.
And that's really not that uncommon. A lot of people, after their dogman experience, their dogman encounter, will move away. Just like I investigated a case up just outside of Medina, Ohio back. It was 2019. Dogman, actually, there was a kennel that the lady kept 5 AKC German Shepherds in. And then there was a second kennel on the property that her husband kept 4 coon hounds in. And one night, Dogman came and killed the German Shepherds. A few nights later, it came back and killed the coon hounds. Well, 2 days after that, it came back and was scratching on the house because they had a little terrier inside. And they literally got so freaked out over that morning they went and got the biggest U-Haul they could. They packed up everything they could fit in the U-Haul and they headed west to Well, it's a hell of a trip from Ohio to Oregon. So I would say that scared them pretty good.
You wouldn't happen to know if they lived in the city in Oregon or if they just moved to the rural parts of Oregon by chance?
Uh, Actually, they moved to just outside of Portland.
Because there are dogmen there too.
I do not know. I actually lost touch with them after they moved away. I did talk with the neighbor. The neighbor actually saw the dog man the night of the first attack, right before the attack happened. She was a nurse that was coming home from work, and it stepped right out in front of her as it walked across the road. She said it was bigger than a grizzly bear on its hind legs. And she made it plain as day in no uncertain time that it was a dog or a wolf's head. It had dog legs, but it was absolutely humongous.
Yeah, it must have been an awfully big one if it was bigger than a grizzly bear. Well, they get quite a bit bigger than that, even, but if it's
Yeah,
bigger than a grizzly, that's nothing to sneeze at.
yeah.
We
Well,
had a little boy,
And
and Kurt knows
go
about
ahead, Mike.
the little McNeilus boy that I covered. Uh, that was a terrible incident. I spoke to the father. His son was found dead, and there was a lot of things that happened during that whole thing that just was not protocol. The little boy was outside playing right before dinner, and the mom told him, play outside a little bit longer. It's almost dinner time. She goes outside to find him, and he's missing. Well, they said they looked in the backyard for about 30 minutes, which didn't make sense to me. If you can't find your kid, in 30 minutes in your own yard, he's gone. So they called 911,
Right.
and I spoke directly to the father, and he told me that his little boy. Now the news and the police released that he was found in the backyard, but the father, and this is like the next day, he told me that his little boy was found out in the pasture, and he was decapitated with his head underneath his left arm, and parts of his anatomy was missing. Uh, I then contacted the IMSA workers that was working there. Finally got a hold of them, and they said the case was really weird because when they arrived, uh, the game wardens were actually on scene, and they would not allow any first responders beyond the front of the house. Now, this house was in the country, and it was very grown up. The yard was not, well groomed, and they were kept to the front of the house. They moved the body, the father said, from the field to the backyard, in which they reported that's where the body was found. Now, the neighbor, I spoke to her also, and she said that the night it happened, there was no noises, no screams, no. She didn't even hear like, a dog fight or nothing. And the only thing she heard was the mother yelling, not my baby, and just really, really bad things because they found her child like that. The little dogs that they took, and this was a little dog, they took it to the pound on a Friday. They ordered them to destroy the dog, to burn the dog, not to collect any evidence. So the dog was burned. The child was also paid for, they said, by the state to be cremated. Now, this family, you could tell that they were not a wealthy family. Nothing wrong with that. People have hard times, but it goes with the investigation. You could just tell that they struggled. And after his passing, the neighbor said there was black helicopters over their houses, and they had called 911. because these helicopters were firing fully automatic weapons, and they told them it was live fire exercises, which we know that doesn't happen over civilian population, but that's what they had told them. And later on, I had found out that the family now is living on another farm in another county, which is a beautiful house. And she had wrote, "We are now finally living our dream."
Yeah, it really is a shame how often things like that happen where someone goes missing or the body's found
Yeah,
and it's under very questionable circumstances. We don't know what actually did it, but it's
Right.
covered up nonetheless. Really is shameful that happens.
You know,
and as much as I hate to say it, so many of these cases that get covered up, there's got to be a reason that they're covering them up.
there was, well, even Kirk, you went up to the Corey Godsey. Remember when we was working on that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
they attempted a big cover up on that. I was actually threatened to back off of that case.
yeah. And I kind of got escorted out of the city by the police unofficially. Um, I did get to talk to eventually the right people to find out that, yeah, this, in no uncertain terms, this was not the 5 dogs that they had put down. This was something else. The boy was consumed partially, and it concentrated on the midsection. Now, the 5 dogs they put down were a French bulldog, 2 corgis, a standard poodle, and a lab. No, none of those dogs are what killed that 13 and a half year old boy.
Right.
Yeah, definitely not. It's a shame too they put those dogs down and tried to blame it on them. That's horrible.
Right.
But
And
And it was actually a lady that works at the dog pound that got a hold of me and asked me to do that because they were, quote, killing innocent dogs for no reason.
it's another thing. It was obvious was they had the other witness. It lived right there, and he kept calling the sheriff's department and them telling them there was a creature up there that had arrived, and he was hearing noises. It wasn't common with the area, and he was concerned. And after he wrote his
He
police
was
report
too,
and everything, he redacted it all. So that tells you that they got to him.
right. He was actually 2 doors down. Uh, and the one neighbor that actually saw them bring the Godsey body up to the ambulance, she said that the blood was still bright red on the sheet they used to cover him up with, which tells me that it was fresh.
Right.
Because blood does not take long out in the atmosphere to start turning brown.
And they wouldn't have, the terrain that the police told us that the body was took up. They said it would have been hard for anything to get him up there. They even had trouble getting up there to even recover the body.
Well, I will grant you it's steep, but it really was not that steep.
what do you two think the fallout would be if the government allowed it to be proven that dogmen actually did exist?
Oh God, there'd be so much liability. Uh, as long as they've denied it, and then they come out and say that We know that it exists. All the deaths. You're going to lose your hikers, your campers, your recreational people that go to the mountains and do the trails. They would lose millions of dollars. I don't think they could afford to allow that to happen. I know that whenever I'd worked in law enforcement and security all my life. My last rank was a captain, and I was an investigator. And I know that as far as protocol, if you get a call of a disturbance at a house, as far as a prowler or window peeker or whatever, that's fine. But if a neighbor was to say, I saw a Sasquatch or anything that was cryptid or unhuman, that was not allowed to pass the desk and go to the judge in that wording. It had to be labeled a prowler. So there is protocol even at the state and local level before it ever reaches the federal level to downplay what you're seeing. And then I don't know about other states, but here in Oklahoma, our game wardens are federal. So that's that would make sense if they're calling the game wardens to these heinous attacks because they are federal, and that would be your first way of getting boots on the ground federal agents at an area to secure it.
What you said is true. People would want to camp or hike or fish or do a lot of those other things that you have to do in the woods, but don't lose sight of the fact that a lot of the things we depend upon on day to day a day to day basis, it's harvested in the forest, from the lumber that we use to make our homes and other structures with, to a lot of medicines are harvested from the forest. Yeah, our whole way of life would be turned upside down. Think about it. Who's going to want to work out there in the woods running a noisy chainsaw for 10 hours out of the day where you can't hear anything that's going on behind you, you can't see what's going on behind you? They're not going to want to do that. So it would just totally, almost overnight, change our way of life, in my opinion.
Oh
And
yeah.
actually, I do know of a logger that he saw something. He won't say or can't say what it was, but it has totally changed his life now. He just he is 100% more cautious of his surroundings, not only out in the woods, but just being around anywhere that there are any woods. He can be sitting in a pavilion at a state park or a county park with a wood line 200 yards away, and he literally always has his eyes on that wood
Well, after seeing that they're out there, I can understand why you would do that.
I had a time, uh, and I also have this on video. I don't have the creatures on video because unfortunately I was carrying a GoPro at the time. But I've talked to Kirk a lot about this one. It kind of bothered me in a sense that I felt, uh, oh, I felt kind of vulnerable. I took the boys with me, my son and my little nephew, and we went down to the lake, and we were walking the lake, and they call it picking up treasures. We pick up little rocks and shells and whatever we find. And my nephew's like, Mike, look, and I look over, and it's just four coyotes that run out of the tree line out into the kind of the opening where the lake had receded. We was in a heavy drought, and we were walking where the lake normally was, and they were staying kind of along the edge of the woods. And I told them, I said, they're not going to hurt you. They're afraid of us. And at the time, I was carrying my pistol. I had a 45 on me, and we're walking, and then my nephew like almost pulls my arm off, and my little boy, he's like, Mike, and my little boy's like, Dad, look, and I look, and these coyotes have went from all fours to bipedal, and one of them has climbed up in the tree and is shaking the tree at us. So in the video, you can see the kids are scared to death. They can see what's going on. I start walking them back across the where we'd walked from across the lake where it dried up. We was about 500 yards from the truck, and as we're going toward the truck, instead of these creatures coming at us, they stayed along the tree line, still bipedally, but they paralleled us all the way, and we're like howling like normal coyotes. It wasn't nothing, it didn't sound unnormal, just them being bipedal, and the one been up in the tree was shaking the tree really hard. And as soon as we got to the truck, and I loaded the boys into the truck, and we jumped in, and they dropped just like coyotes. They just dropped to all fours and then ran off into the woods.
Well, if that doesn't get your motor running, I don't know what will.
Oh, I kept thinking in my head, what am I going to do if they come rushing across the open? And I don't know if you're familiar with the Girl Scout murders of Oklahoma. I learned a whole lot of I'll call it superstition for right now. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I went up there and talked to the shaman where this stuff is still practiced, and I told them that story. And one of them told me, he said, "You know why they don't come out into the open?" And I said, "No, I thought that they might." And he said, "A long time ago." And see, they have a little different belief than what we believe. I would say Dog Man, and they would get upset with me. Dog Man, they said, is a white man's name for them. They call them they Sasquatch or Googway. They say they're all the same thing. They don't differentiate between a dog man, a werewolf. They think that they're the same thing. And he said the reason that they don't come out of the open is because he said they used to trade with them back in the old days until they started taking their women and eating their children. He said they started trading with the white man, and then the Indians ended up. He said we had rifles, and we started getting the white man stuff, and we was able to kill them at a decent range. They had learned that we was able to shoot them in the open. He said, so they learned to stick to the trees. They knew that they were safer in the trees because it took our distance away from being able to engage them, and that's what led them to going deeper into the woods, and what caused them, he said, to go deep into the woods and stay in the marshes and the thick woods and stuff is because they feel protected, that they're not in the open. So that was kind of one of their theories.
I'll tell you what, and I do mean this wholeheartedly. Up in the Northeast, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia area, when you find a large growth of ferns, you will normally find a cryptid there, be it a Sasquatch or be it a dog. For some reason, ferns seem to be what they are attracted to. Maybe it's they like to bed in them. I don't know, but they definitely are attracted to ferns.
It's interesting.
Yeah, that is good information to know. I wonder what it is about them also. That's strange.
Hmm.
I mean, we've got a couple places up here. I live in southwest Pennsylvania, and there are a couple places that border on a swamp and big, big, thick clump of ferns. And when I say big, thick clump, it's probably 2 acres worth of ferns along that swamp. And you go there, you can feel something watching you. You can hear things from in the swamp, but yet they're not too deep in the swamp that are trailing you. And the one time my partner was up there, and there he is. He's over by where the ferns are, by kind of at the edge of the swamp, and about an 8-foot log comes flying at him.
Mhm.
Didn't miss him by 6 inches.
You know, like what me and Kurt talked about, when we done the Girl Scout, uh, the you question sometimes, like, what am I seeing? Am I seeing what I'm seeing? And I went back and I read, and me and Kurt discussed this a lot, and there's a lot from that case to be learned, other than just what had happened to those poor little girls. You have documentation from the OSBI, the FBI, the Sheriff's Department, and the Police Department of a werewolf in the area, a shapeshifter. And this is documented. Uh, that they said that they would see a man running and he would go behind a tree. And then they would see this black dog that would sometimes be bipedal, sometimes it would be a normal dog. And this dog got so famous that he was ending up in their reports all the time. And, what was it? 24 agents retired after that. Some of them took their lives,
Yeah.
some of them
Yep.
disappeared. There was a
Yeah, the
lot
ones that disappeared are the ones that I really question.
Yeah. There was a lot of things seen up there I think wasn't meant to be seen that was placed in reports.
Exactly right.
If the general
you
public
think about
knew,
it.
oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Vic.
If the general public knew how often this happens, eyewitnesses see dogmen or Sasquatch and it's just covered up by the police in a report and buried, they would look at things a lot differently. That's for sure.
Oh,
Yes,
that
they would.
that was probably one of the worst cases I've ever looked into. Uh, I still struggle with it. I struggle with letting it go right now. Still, me and Kurt talk about it daily.
Yep.
We just decided that
because it's not settled yet. There's one person yet
right
that needs to go away for it.
And it's like, I don't know. There's, whenever you have the OSBI saying we're seeing a bipedal canine, that's how they labeled it, was a bipedal canine. And then you got your local police, you got your sheriff's department, you have, the OSBI, the FBI, and they're all saying, yeah, it's something out here. And then you have the local natives there that they still live the old ways, and they're like, it's a googway, we know it's there, they live all in here. And there was a guy just down the road that he was slaughtered, I mean, so bad that they had to come in with a front end loader and remove the dirt from the ditch to be able to clean it up. He was just slaughtered.
Wow, that's pretty bad when you have to do that to clean up the crime scene.
Yeah.
What that poor man must have gone through.
It was, in the...
Well, unfortunately, it happens. They do this way too often.
Miss Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
There was things that they said in that case that just blew my mind. I mean, they take her to the hospital. They say she was laying in water up to her neck. She was half consumed alive. And then the police put in their report she was uncooperative. I've never met a person that was in shock that was cooperative. It makes you wonder sometimes. And this is just a theory, not saying it, but sometimes do they not want people to survive what they've encountered? There was a guy that me and Kurt spoke to, and we just have to take his word on it. We can't prove he's who he said he was, but he said he was Dennis Martin's uncle, and that they know where his, he said they know where his body's at. That the Green Berets, they didn't come in to find him. They came in to make sure that he wasn't found. He wasn't brought out alive because of what he had seen. and that he was burned with the feral peoples. What this guy told us.
Yep. Yep.
I had a conversation with Kirk some time ago where he told me that if he had to choose between having an encounter with a Sasquatch or Sasquatch plural and feral people, he said he'd take the Sasquatch hands down because nothing's more
Yep.
dangerous than a human. What's your take on that, Mike? Would you rather deal with feral people or Sasquatch if you had to pick either or?
I would probably. It's funny you asked that because I did have a feral person encounter this summer. Um, I would take the Sasquatch probably because when I grew up, now Granny always told the Sasquatch he should say he's not going to hurt you. He's curious. He might poke around, make some noises, but most
Yeah,
generally
he
she would all
will hurt you.
right. But she always told us he's not as big of a danger. Now this feral guy, this summer, we were driving, me and my sister and my daughter, and we were driving these old back roads down here that just lead to nowhere. The old city's underwater now, and this person crawls up over the side of the bridge, and we're like, "What is this guy doing?" And he gets in the middle of the road. He has no shirt on. He has a big beard, crazy hair. Looks like he's been wallering with the pigs, for a week, and barefooted. And he's got cut off shorts on, and he just falls in the road, just I mean face first, and the dust just flies up, and he starts slapping the road. And I told my sister, I was like, "Stop! Don't drive up on him." So I opened my door and I yelled at him and I said, "Do you need any help?" And he just laid there and he started like I don't know, kind of flopping around. He stood up and he started coming at us. And I yelled at him. I said, "Don't come at us. I have my daughter and my sister with me." I said, "I will get you help if you need help." And he starts cussing us. I mean, really bad, just like angry, "Come here to me." And I'm telling her to back up, and he starts like running at us in this dead run. Well, I ended up having to draw down on him, and I called the sheriff's department, and they came out and they arrested him and took him into town. And later on, they had said that they had to take him back and release him because he hadn't broke the law, but he was living down there. Him and his family lived down in the woods. He was feral.
How close did you come to shooting them?
Uh, he probably made it about 50 yards from us. I would have gave him the 21 feet. He the way he was coming at us in a full run, the language he was using, he was making threats of bodily harm. Uh, he was grabbing stuff off the road. So he had, I mean, he had stuff in his hands, and then having two little girls with me. Uh, I'll just say that he wasn't going to hurt them.
Yeah,
That's a good way to put it, Mike.
Why didn't you drive away though?
On the roads that we have down here, we have single lane roads, and where I live, like I said, we're out in the middle of nowhere. Our ditches are cut very, very deep. So when you go to do a turnaround, it's really hard to turn around on these. We call them pretty much what you would call it's a cattle road. These roads go through the middle of fields, and when it rains, you can't even drive on these roads. You'll bury your trucks. So if you swing around and you drop off in one of these ditches, you're not going to come out of that ditch. You're going to have somebody come and get you. So if you're hurrying with him running at you and the distance and everything, and you drop off in there, it's going to be a bad situation.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. Wow, that must have been a crazy thing to see.
Oh, he was. And then, of course, I ran into him again. I was telling Kurt they were
Yeah.
riding. I don't know if they're called like I don't even know what you call them, like mopeds or they're like little motorcycles with like lawnmower motors on them. And I was walking down on the lake, and I ran into a whole bunch of them. They were down there, and they were all dressed the same. They had the long beards, the crazy hair, and they had like little huts and stuff down there. And I told Kirk I didn't see any guns on them, but they all had Bowie knives around their chest. They had their shirts off, and they had belts, and they had Bowie knives on them. And I went ahead and left. I didn't stick around. There was more of them than there was me. And whenever I drove out, two of them, they rode their little motorcycle things behind me until I made it to the highway.
Well, that's creepy.
Yeah.
Gosh, yeah, I never knew until I spoke with Kirk. I had no idea that there were feral people like that in Oklahoma. I knew that they were in Appalachia in various
Yep.
places, but
Yep.
because I saw a show on that, it was a really interesting show. But yeah, I never knew that they were in Oklahoma and other places. But when you think about it, it really does make sense that they would be elsewhere.
Yeah, they
Sure, there was a, shall we say, a small number of returning Vietnam vets that were not really able to adjust to life back in the civilian world. And a lot of those, sure, there were a lot ended up taking their lives, but there were also a lot that ended up in the Northwest, out in the woods, living as feral people. Um, we have feral people here in the Appalachian Mountains. I mean, Pennsylvania, you have them. West Virginia, you have them. I'm sure you have them all the way down through Tennessee, probably even into Georgia.
If they're living in areas where the wintertime brings cold, nasty weather, it really makes you wonder how they adapt to that because without heavy clothing or deep cave systems to retreat into, they really wouldn't be able to handle that, you wouldn't think. And
Well,
even
that's
if you
just
do
it.
have,
In the Appalachian Mountains, there's plenty of cave systems. There's plenty of abandoned coal mines. I mean, all you've got to do is look around. You will find somewhere to shelter.
these guys actually had large white, it looked like teepees kind of tents. They kind of reminded me of like a circus tent, maybe kind of, but they were white and they were, they went up to a point. They had a bunch of those out there.
you can find shelter by going into caves and maybe making tents somehow out of things you scavenge, but you can only stay hidden so long in the wintertime. You have to get out and about and face the elements to get food and water and all that sort of thing. Yeah, you can find water underground in certain caves, but
Right.
not in
Well,
coal mines normally that you can drink. So it makes me wonder how they adapt, how they can actually go out when it's 20 degrees or something like that. And of course, the food isn't necessarily going to jump out and offer itself to them. So they'd have to be out in the
right.
elements for some time. So, short of wearing buckskins or something like that, I don't know how they do it.
I think they probably, they probably live in town part time too, because I mean, the tents that they had, they weren't, buckskin or nothing. They were, canopy tents, and the mopeds or whatever they were driving, they would have to get fuel for those and things like that. But they were, you could tell whenever they talk, their speech, you could tell that they weren't, well educated either. They were, but like I said, where I'm at down here, we don't have a lot of people really go down in the woods here. We get a lot of hunters, but the hunters around here are not what I call hunters, I guess, because they walk like 30, 40 yards off the road and they're at their deer stand. To where me, I set a deer stand. I go way down in there, and but most people don't do that anymore. Most people, they just find a spot and they go a little ways off the road, and that's as far as the timbers ever explored. And these people, they were you could tell they've been down there a while because they had the tents and they had like little makeshift like tables out there, and there was tracks everywhere where they had been riding, and you could tell that they were down there a whole lot.
Was it you, Kirk, that told me about some of these feral people having kind of like a whitish glaze over their eyes or something?
Yep. Yes, they do. Have a whitish glaze, almost like a shark's eye is. Not quite the same, but yeah, it kind of appears to be the same to where you almost can't see any pupil whatsoever. But yet, yeah, it is there. And I was also telling you about that one individual that was hiking the Appalachian Trail and had 5 of them standing outside of the shelter talking back and forth in their own language. He said it seemed like they were trying to decipher, you know, to decide who was going to get what part when they cut him up. So he just pulled his 357 Magnum out and ripped a couple rounds off at him. He never went to sleep that night, of course. Kept the gun out in his hand all night. First daybreak, he took off, heading, trying to get to a town the whole time with the gun in his hand. Said he never saw him again, but he actually could hear them tracking him just inside the wood line, you know, following him right down the trail. And he said he was never so happy in his life as to get off that trail at the first sign of civilization. And unfortunately, he never finished the Appalachian Trail after that. That was where it ended.
Well, I can understand why. Yeah, stories like that, it really makes me
Exactly.
wonder how many people are taken off that Appalachian Trail by things like feral people and who knows what else.
Well, unfortunately, we'll never know.
Tell him about the guy,
Because-
Kurt, the kid, remember, in the sleeping bag, what had happened? It was trying to take his kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, we don't know whether that was feral people, whether that was Sasquatch, whether that was Dogman, but when it was pulling out the sleeping bag with the child in it, man just proceeded to rip a couple rounds right through the front of the tent where it was pulling toward. You know, that solved that issue.
Yeah, it was actually pulling his kid out of the tent while he was asleep, and his kid was in the sleeping bag. And he wakes up and sees his kid sliding out of the front of the zipper.
Wow, and his kid didn't wake up as he was being pulled out of the tent?
No.
Nope.
Well, those rounds going off woke him up. I guarantee that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. You know, you would think that those feral people, that they would have run-ins with these cryptids, like even maybe like a competition for food.
And I'm not sure that they don't. But once more, in my opinion, there is nothing more dangerous in the woods than a human. Because that human can think like you can think. Okay. Where we don't know what the thought process behind a Sasquatch is, or the thought process behind a Dogman.
Right.
Okay, but we know what the thought process behind that human.
And the tools, that they're finding, me and Kirk talked about that, they're finding arrowheads, and they're finding other
spear
tools.
Points.
Yeah, and some of them are made out of like the old insulators from the telephone poles and stuff. And now they're starting to realize that this stuff is handmade and it's been hunted with, but it doesn't match the date to where it would have been the natives. This stuff is still being produced in the wild and still being used.
Depending on how intelligent those feral people are, they could figure quite a few things out, but if they go up against Dogmen or Sasquatch, I just don't see that anymore for them at all, because the ability of Sasquatch that they come up against and Dogmen they come up against is so much higher than anything they can bring to the table. I just don't see how they have a chance.
I think it'd be a shred fest. I don't think it would matter. They would all, I think that that little McNeilus boy was a really good example of how fast something can grab a child, take a child 200 yards across the field, decapitate a child, eat the organs, the ribs, parts of its stomach. His whole throat area was never recovered either. Take the head, place it under his left arm. It was placed under his left arm, setting up, which I think was, sinister in itself. It was, I think,
very.
yeah, I think it was meant to, to bother the parents or whoever found the child. Uh, and this, according to the dad, this happened within 30 minutes, and nobody heard the child scream. Nobody heard a dog fight. The neighbor said if there's a dog kennel just right across the road by him, and she said if you even accidentally let go of your door and it slams too hard, she said them dogs go crazy. And there was no noise that night. Now, there was a rumor. the the mother and the father were into Wicca witch stuff, and the night that the little boy was attacked and killed was on a full moon, and I can't remember which moon it was. I believe it was the harvest moon. I'm not exactly sure on that, but it happened at almost the exact same time, and I remember that was questioned in the investigation because they said that what was it they said, the bite on it, Kirk, looked like a shark had bit him.
A shark had
Yeah,
attacked.
they said it was just massive.
He was shredded.
Yeah, and then not long after that happened, there was a little girl down in Oklahoma. I can't remember her name, but she actually was not far from that area, and she was attacked, and this creature had actually bit her over her shoulder, and one part of the mouth went down onto her chest. The other part of
Right.
the mouth went down her back, and it had bit her so hard and it pulled so hard that it actually pulled ligaments and stuff loose. She did survive it. Now, the weird thing about what had happened and how she survived, her dog actually saved her life, but they questioned her without her mom or dad present and came out and said, oh, well, she said it was a coyote. Well, later
A
on,
coyote, yeah.
yeah, later on, the mother was in their town and she was going around telling everybody, don't let your kids out. There is a monster out here. It was not a coyote. It was not a coyote. My daughter told me it wasn't a coyote. They're lying. There is a monster. She saw this monster, and they actually went and told her if she didn't shut up, they was going to arrest her for terroristic threats for causing panic.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
Hey guys, as much as I hate to say this, for some reason my earbuds are about to die. They should be good for 4 hours, and I've had them in an hour and 20 minutes. So you might lose me.
Okay. But when they start threatening you to not tell the truth, that we're going to arrest you.
Yeah, when they try to shut you up, there's an issue there.
And that little girl, the bite, oh my God. I mean, can you imagine something's in your mouth large enough to come over your shoulder, halfway down, her chest, and then the same length in her back?
That poor girl. Yeah, just imagine how she could ever possibly live a normal life, anything resembling a normal life ever again after experiencing something like that. That's horrible.
Yeah.
And then you got guys coming in, she don't even know who they are, and she's went through this traumatic experience, and then they're telling her it was this right here. It was a coyote. It was a coyote.
Yeah, you know what I say those guys can do.
It's just you read, and if you're familiar with police reports and you read and you're familiar with reports, you can tell when they're trying to elude you from something by the wording, by how they use it. It appeared to be, or a lot of times the victims, if they see this creature, they'll say, even in the Brenda Hamilton, they had a 911 call. I'd found out, actually discovered this uh, about 3 days before she was murdered in that ditch. They had three 911 calls. A lady reported a bipedal black, she called it a cat, walking across that field. Well, the dispatcher took it upon herself to say that a person had called in a cat, that they had misidentified it. She never told them about it being bipedal, about it being huge, or the noises they were hearing. And then Miss Hamilton gets killed in the same area. And, a lot of times they'll say, well, they misidentified it. She was afraid. It was dark. She lives at home alone. And they'll
Right,
start throwing all
exactly.
that in. And it's sad how they do that. They start, writing their own report, their own, they make their own conclusions.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's very sad.
And you have a lot of elderly ladies that live out here. Their husbands have passed away, and I mean they're living in the middle of nowhere. And then they call the police, and they come out, and they ridicule you and tell you that you're seeing things, or there's no such thing as monsters. But the whole time he's telling you this, and you're saying, "Well, I heard a noise out in the barn. Will you go check it out?" And they're like, "No, I'm pretty sure it's fine out there. It's probably just a raccoon," and they leave.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's not a swamp kitty you heard out there.
yeah, and it's sad. And I've seen you know the thing that I seen in the cattails, and I've seen it walking at the lake. And I had a friend one time. She wanted to get an encounter, and I took her down there. She got to see it drink from the lake. I mean, but it's never. I guess I've never been bluff charged. A lot of people talk about being bluff charged. I've never been bluff charged. Out of all the times I've had them close to camp, I've had them make noises and stuff, but I've never been bluff charged. They always seem to kind of like move on.
Well, thank goodness for that. I hope it never does happen to you.
Yeah, you're lucky.
Yeah, no doubt. Especially if you go out looking to rub elbows with these guys.
Oh, I look for them. I look for them often. Uh, I'm in the woods a lot. I have a lot of people on my channel. They'll say, well, "How come you're not bringing us a lot of the boots on the ground?" And what they don't understand is every time you go out, you're not going to have an encounter. In fact, most of the time you go out, you're not going to have an encounter. Now you might find evidence of something being there, or, stuff like that. But as far as an actual encounter, they're few and far between.
Like I said, there's times that you might go out twice in a row, have encounters both times, and then the next 100 times you go out and nothing happens.
Right. But it's kind of like a pack of coyotes. For a few nights you'll have them in the south field, and then next thing you know they're over in the north field. They kind of move around.
Yep. And me and a friend had actually spent almost 5 years tracking a what we call pack or clan of dogmen that were from the Bardstown, Kentucky area. And you could actually watch their migration to where just about the end of November, they would be back down in the Logan County, West Virginia area. And then come spring again, they would head back west toward Bardstown area.
And people are really seeing things, because I know a lady, and Kurt knows her also. She had a really, really nice house, and she had a really bad encounter. So bad that she left this beautiful house. I mean, I'm talking a beautiful house. She left everything in it, her jewelry, everything, and she moved away. And she's letting this house just rot away. It's because she is so afraid that she's going to see this thing again. that's how afraid she actually is.
Yep, she will not go back to that house at all.
When you say she had a bad encounter, what was the nature of the encounter?
She had went outside one night, and where she lived, she was on kind of a side of a hill, and she had a beautiful place, a beautiful view, and she would go out, and when she walked around her corner one night, it was standing there, and it just, I, well, you can't even hardly talk to her today. Me and Kurt tried to, get her to talk about the story, and it's it's too hard on her. She left her whole life behind over that,
Right.
and I mean, just left everything. Her jewelry, everything is still there to this day. How she lived in that house is how she left it.
Well, unfortunately, it probably isn't still there. I'm sure that it has been ransacked by crackheads and God knows what all else, but yeah, she did leave basically everything she owned there.
And it was a beautiful house, just a beautiful home.
That really is a shame, but that sort of thing happens all the time.
Yeah.
There was one lady, I was listening to a podcast where Kumbo was talking about a lady he had been talking with for, I guess, years. And this lady's husband, I believe, had a heart attack and died, and they were way out in the sticks. And after the husband passed away, they had type 3s, Googway, hanging around the property, or I guess they started coming around the property. And one night when she was sitting there in her chair in the living room, she heard this commotion in the basement. Turns out one of them or some of them broke through her basement wall. They had dug down to the outside of the basement wall, and they collapsed. They broke right through that basement wall. And when she heard that, she just grabbed her keys and ran for the car and just left the home as is, refused to go back. I guess she called Kumbo and told him what had happened, and he offered to go in and get whatever she wanted him to bring her. But she said, no, just leave everything. Don't bother bringing me anything from that house. Right. So, yeah, that's just horrible. Can you imagine?
As a kid, I remember when we was at Granny's, everything that would happen, and we just touched really the surface of the things that had happened. And I remember being so afraid, being down there because you never knew. Like, I was telling Kirk, we laughed about it the other night, but I had got a drink one night, and I went to look out the window because we had heard something. And when I did, it slapped the window, and I spilled the drink everywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know if it done it to scare me, or if it done it, because maybe I looked out and it, was there. But I mean, there was times I didn't even want to look out the windows. I didn't want to hear it. You just wanted to just like get away, like call somebody to come and get you because, I mean, the dogs would be outside having a fit, and you could hear this thing like grunting and growling and scratching on the house and pushing on the doors and knocking on the. We had it knocking on the door one time, and we couldn't figure out how it was knocking on the door, and then we couldn't see it, so we called my uncle, and he ended up coming down, and he was in Vietnam, and he's like, well, the reason y'all ain't seeing it is because it has an upside down knuckles. And I was like, that don't make no sense. And then he's like, it's on top of the house reaching over knocking on the door. He said, don't go outside when it does that because it's going to be right above you. And that just scared us to death.
Yeah.
Well, there's stories about them. In fact, we covered this on episode 66 of Dogman Encounters. Stories of them doing things to lure you outside, and when people go out their front doors, these guys reaching down and grabbing people by the head and pulling them up on the roof.
Oh, man. The largest footprint that my mom and them found down there was a 22-inch. That was the largest one they found. Pretty good size.
Vic, I don't know whether you knew this or not, but just outside Cadillac, Michigan, there is a road. Its actual official name is Dogman Road.
Huh? No, I didn't know that.
Now,
Never heard of that before.
there is only 2 houses on that road before it becomes a major road. But that 5 mile or so stretch, there's only the 2 houses. One of the houses is about 150 years old, not as dilapidated as you would expect it to be. And the other one is all the way down at the end where it gets to, shall we say, a good section at the edge of the city. But you would think over the last 100 years or so, somebody else would have built a house on that road. But no.
Mm-hmm.
And that one particular house, you actually can on occasion see Dogman on the property, see Dogman on the roof.
Well, sounds like they named it appropriately then. That's pretty rough.
Yeah.
Hey, Vic, what do you think about in Oklahoma? Do you think, I was wondering this the other night, do you think that the folk monster that they had back, in the 70s, I think it was, do you think that it's that same one that was coming into Oklahoma and going down into Louisiana? Do you think that was that same creature?
I doubt it. The Falk monster?
Yeah.
I really doubt that. Yeah, it's no different than when you're pre-med in school learning how to become a doctor. When they get to the point where they're teaching you how to diagnose illnesses, they tell you when you hear hooves clicking on the floor behind you, think horse, not zebra, for obvious reasons. Could it be a zebra? Right. Yeah, it could be, but the odds are it's just a horse.
Right.
So, yeah, to answer your question, it's really no different. I mean, odds are it was just other Sasquatch and not the actual Falk monster or the Sasquatch plural that a lot of people just thought was one Sasquatch doing all those things. No, I think that you're talking about different Sasquatch there.
Right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you are.
Oh, Bobby Ford got tossed around pretty good that night, huh?
Yeah, he did. Can you imagine?
Oh. There was, I mean...
My leg can.
Yeah, Kurt got his leg hurt by one, he said.
Yeah, that he did. He came on an episode of My Bigfoot Sighting and talked about that. I can only imagine what he went through.
I know that they, it seems like once they get, I don't know if it's imprint on somebody or what it is, but it's almost like they become infatuated with certain people. Like there's that, I don't know if it's the curiosity or if they, maybe look at somebody and say, "Well, I bet he tastes good," or I don't know. There's something. I'm not sure what it is that causes them to, like these kids. These kids are found. Some are alive, and then some of them are eaten. I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be in any kind of a consistent pattern to that.
And some people, me and Kurt tell a lot of people, there's a lot of people that call into us and they'll tell us, oh, we feed them all the time. They're friendly, and we go out and communicate with them. And then there was this one lady up in Alaska, wasn't it, Kurt? She poisoned one, and
it was not a good idea.
Yeah, it moaned and groaned all night, she said, and then the next day they found her boyfriend, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And he was dead. It had killed him, and his mom was killed too, I think, and she ended up having to move back to her own country.
Right.
But yeah, she poisoned him.
Wow. Yeah, definitely not a good move. These guys, they're vindictive. If you do them wrong, they're not going to forget about it or let it slide.
And that may be why they were so bad down there, because so many people, at my granny's, they had shot at them.
The long and short of it is, I tell everybody, protect yourself, but, unless they're threatening you, you're probably best off to just leave them be, watch them from afar, don't antagonize them, but protect yourself.
A lot of people, they got mad at me, and Kurt was a witness to that. Whenever I had the boys down there at the lake, they were like, why didn't you shoot at him? Why didn't you shoot at him? And, a lot of things crossed my mind. I'm like, they're not charging me. They're not coming after me. They're at a safe distance. If I shoot and I injure one of them, and they are intelligent and they are, vindictive, and they're like, you just shot one of our family members, I could cause a, halfway safe situation into a, all out charge.
Yeah, and especially if there's more than one there, you can pretty well be sure that you're a dead man.
Yeah, no doubt. If you do something like that.
Oh, and being ate alive, that would be terrible, because they'd probably start at your legs. It probably wouldn't be fast.
Yeah, it probably would. Not my favorite way of going out, definitely.
Dogman's favorite food's finger food.
Yeah. Let's not get Alpo tattooed on our forehead, though.
Yeah. His baloney does have a first name.
Exactly. Well, Mike, we've reached the 90-minute mark. We probably need to close this out. And Vic, please plug your shows. Every last one of them. We appreciate the hell out of you coming on here.
Yes.
You have been a great guest.
Yeah, and everybody go support Vic. Go subscribe to him and give him all your support. He deserves it. He works hard on these.
Well, thanks for inviting me on, guys. I appreciate it. Well, the show that I'm most known for is Dogman Encounters. New episodes air every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And then my new Bigfoot show is called My Bigfoot Sighting. New episodes air every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time as well. And then you've also got my newest show, which is called My Paranormal Experience. New episodes of My Paranormal Experience also air every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So it makes it really easy to catch the new episodes.
Wonderful.
Yep. Thank you for coming on, Vic. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Vic.
Well, thanks
Means
for
a lot.
having me. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Anytime.
If I can ever help you, please let me know.
Definitely. Same with us.
I appreciate it.